Welcome to the Cities Efficiency Leadership Council webinar series. This is hosted by SPEAR and the State Energy Conservation Office. Today, our presentation is using data to create stories. What makes a story engaging? Characters, setting, a seemingly impossible conflict to be resolved in the final pages. Context and detail are vital elements for anyone wanting to go from numbers and a spreadsheet to comprehension on the faces of colleagues and partners. So I'm very excited for JD Douglas from City of Denton. He's going to do a deeper dive on how to create stories from data. You're going to learn how to identify the key elements of data communication and develop a comprehensive story from start to finish. And this is going to have a focus on resource conservation. We'll have examples as building efficiency, water conservation, and budgeting, which is all important aspects in running a sustainability program or any other type of program, especially with energy efficiency. In addition, we will explore the world of data dashboards and how they can be used at their most simple level to tell several versions of a story from different perspectives. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about SPEAR. We're one of 6 regional energy efficiency organizations across the nation. We cover Oklahoma and the state of Texas, and our mission is to accelerate the adoption of advanced building systems and energy efficient products and services in the South Central United States. And as well as the City Efficiency Leadership Council. This program, the purpose is to align regional partner initiatives across the state of Texas and Oklahoma, leverage resources and share best practices, such as this webinar, and then provide networking and capacity building opportunities. As well as we have several programs where we're going to be providing mentorships, and I always share opportunities for funding opportunities through our newsletters, and then also collaborating as a group on regional sustainability projects and initiatives. I do want to mention that cities in the name, but it also covers counties, state entities, school districts, and universities. And the membership is free. Again, it is sponsored by the State Energy Conservation Office. And also a few housekeeping items before we move forward. You'll receive the slides via email within around about 24 hours of this event. And then we also have a follow-up survey. Please let us know how the webinar was in the survey so that we can always look at different topics and also get some good ideas and feedback. As well as I want to go over a little bit, we're using a platform called Slido. If you're not familiar with Slido, you can actually put it on your phone or you can utilize it right there on your computer if you have 2 screens. What you would do is go to slido.com and then you would type in 135-3231. And in this space, we have a couple of questions. One question right now that I have live is a word cloud. And the question is, what are some of the challenges for telling your story through data? And if you could just say in one word what your challenges are, that would be great, because this information helps us move forward and we give this feedback with the State Energy Conservation Office. So again, you'll receive all the slides. You'll receive an email with a recording link to the SPEAR YouTube, our YouTube channel. And then also please respond and give us feedback through the survey. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker today. His name is, he goes by JT, and he is worked for the City of Denton for 5 years, first as an industrial pretreatment specialist, and then now as his current role as conservation programs coordinator. He works primarily on greenhouse gas mitigation, energy conservation, and air quality. JT has a BS in environmental geoscience from Slippery Rock University of Pennsylvania and a master's of science in resource management and environmental science from Montana State University. All right, it's all yours. I'm going to stop sharing.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get presentation up here. All right. Sean, are you able to see that? Okay.
Yes, it looks
Okay,
good.
perfect. So as Sean said, my name is James Douglas. I go by JT, and I work for the City of Denton in the Sustainability Office as the Conservation Programs Coordinator. Like Sean said, some of my topic areas that I focus on and the ones that a lot of my examples today are going to be derived from are energy and water conservation, air quality. Denton is currently working on its first climate action plan. So we've been working a good bit on that, as well as the greenhouse gas component of that. And then some transportation as well when it comes to some of the data analytics. What's cool about this is each one of these different topic areas, I use data visualization daily in each one of these, and each one is a little bit different, right? So when we talk about storytelling, there's different important components to each one of these topic areas. And so getting that variety is really kind of nice for that. So I always like to kind of set expectations for a presentation. And so really this is what I'm hoping to get out of the presentation today for everybody here. So we'll do your typical start, the what, where, the when, the how, and the why. It wouldn't be a good story without an overused quote and a shocking plot twist. So keep an eye out for that through this presentation. And really, we want to tie it together with a happy ending. My goal for this presentation is that everybody can kind of take away one item from today's presentation, and whether, next week, this week, you're doing a report, a presentation where you've got a visual element, hopefully you can draw at least one thing from this presentation and incorporate that into what it is that you're working on. So I want to start by talking about how to frame your story. And this kind of ties into this presentation as well. So you want to make sure that everybody is starting with the same information and starting from that same point by providing the background information and the context that's necessary to get everybody started. So what are we really talking about here today? So as many of you probably know, if you're in a role that involves communicating data from a spreadsheet, from a page that's just full of numbers, into something meaningful, something that has value. Stories are really the vehicle in which we do that. And so the better that we get at this process, the more meaningful that data and information becomes. And if you're like me, the more that you practice this, the more that you can draw out of a spreadsheet or a data download or something like that. And so it's really important to kind of continue with that practicing and that learning. So at its basic level, what is data storytelling? So it's boiled down to three things. So it's a clearly defined setting, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but it's the where, the when, the how, the why. You want to set up a clear setting so that everybody knows exactly what we're there to talk about. And that's going to be in each and every visual. So if you've got a lengthy presentation, each one of those visuals should contain all of that information so that not a single one of them can be taken out of context. Each of these stories should contain a simple plot. Again, when we talk about just a single graphic, it takes the viewer about 2 seconds to make an initial opinion about that graphic, to absorb a piece of information from that graphic. And so the more simple that we can keep those stories, the better, right? Not a Game of Thrones, multiple storylines, multiple plot lines going on at one time. We want to communicate one piece of information per graphic in each graphic that we create. And then also we want to have a meaningful conclusion. So what does that mean? So essentially that means we need all of the context that's within that to make sure that people walk away with a conclusion that makes sense, that is actionable, especially for those of us that are in the private sector or in the public sector. If you're presenting to management, to your elected officials, we want to make sure that we are providing information for the best informed decision-making that we possibly can. So let's start with a little bit of an example of how do we set up the setting in each one of these graphics. So as I've said multiple times now, that's the what, the where, the when, that's sort of the basic level. When you start getting into the how and the why, that's where things really start to make sense. So let's go through a quick example and I will talk a little bit about that. So we've got a basic graph here, basic line graph, and we're not getting a whole lot. from this, right? So you take a look at the x-axis there, we don't have any context. We can probably decide that that's years, right? We typically see time on the x-axis. That's a good practice. And then we've got something on the y-axis that we don't know what that is yet. So we want to make sure that we're providing that context in everything that leaves from our office, right? So now we've added a little bit here. So we've added the what. So we're talking about water, and we know that that's in millions of gallons on the y-axis. We've confirmed that x-axis is year. That's time. That's great. We've got the where. So this is the city of Denton, and we know that this is annual municipal water consumption from 2012 to 2022. So we've got the when in there as well. So that's pretty good. But we want to make sure that we're getting sort of the right information out of this. So let's change it up a little bit. So this looks pretty different. So let's take a look at the title and kind of figure out what happened there. So this is exactly the same information, but now we're taking a look at the city of Denton monthly municipal water consumption. And this tells a very different story, right? So now we've got these peaks and valleys. We can see that there's a pattern, there's something going on here. And we've also got a little bit of a dip there in 2020 and 2021. So maybe there's something there. And then if you look at the when, we've also shortened this, right? So we're trying to hone in on a little bit of context. So now we've got a 5-year window here, 2017 to 2022. And we can kind of take this to the next level. We've learned a lot here, right? We can kind of identify some of these peaks or our summer peaks. So we can make an assumption about that. Water use is higher in the summer, of course. But let's take it to the next level and see if we can add a little bit more of the why. So this is much different than where we started, right? So now we've got even more context. We've got monthly municipal water usage by type. So we've got indoor water usage and we've got irrigation. And so now we can see that indoor water usage, more or less, is staying pretty consistent through that time. We've still got those summer peaks. When we talk about irrigation, though, now we're talking about something else. So we've got those very large summer peaks. And so again, this is exactly the same information that we started with, but now we can start making some assumptions about this, maybe making some decisions based off of this. We see the 2020 and 2021 numbers are a little bit lower, right? So we can make some assumptions there. What was different about our COVID-19 operations that weren't there? We still had all of those outdoor spaces, right, that were staying green, getting irrigated. Folks were still outside using those spaces. But what was different was things like public pools, our water park, things like baseball fields and soccer fields where folks weren't gathering in those team sports. And so maybe those weren't being irrigated, right? So we've got a lot more context, and we've pulled, just with a couple iterations of this information, we've pulled so much more knowledge out of that data set than we had originally. So something that I really like to incorporate into presentations like this is the concept of honest storytelling. And so here is your overused quote of the day. With great power comes great responsibility, right? We are, in some capacity, in all of our professional roles, we are taking that information and we're a filter for that, right? We're taking the information off of the page, we're deciding what's important, and we're putting that into graphics and presenting that to the public, to our management team, to make decisions on that information. And so with that power comes responsibility to make sure that we're taking the important information and we're telling a true and honest story with those numbers. So a little bit of a example of this, and this is related to energy costs, essentially electricity costs at the municipal level. So we've got 2 true statements and a false statement here. So municipal spending on electricity increased 13% from the previous year, right? That's a statement that you could see potentially in a written report, right? These are all sort of written statements here. So we've got one that's a whole number. In 2022, the city spent $1,037,730 more on electricity as compared to 2021. Then over here, we've got a statement about the budget impact. So the budget impact of electricity spending was increased 0.05% compared to 2021. So We're going to think about all of these statements. We're going to decide which one is true. And this is your plot twist. The only false statement there was that one of these was false. Each of these is completely true, but each one on its own tells a very different story about this information. So if you're talking to your budget group, your finance team, saying that relative percentage, that's probably some good context, right? If that increase, what's the overall budget impact of that increase? Now, if you're talking to a group of middle school students about the city's cost of electricity, that statement of $1 million, that's $1 million, right? So that's, the context is very important. And the truth of all of this is that none of these statements by themselves is probably enough. When we put all three of these in there, we're talking about a much more complete story of what's really going on. So we've got that relative comparison to previous years. We've got the true whole number, and then we've got the context of that in the larger picture of the entire budget. And so that's kind of best practice, is to give more than one piece of context there. So let's talk about another example and potentially where we could go astray in our presentation of information. So again, staying on electricity, but this time we're talking about kilowatt hours and electricity consumption. So this graph here, again, 2 seconds to kind of grab a single piece of information out of this. We can see that 2022, way up from this graph, right? If I wanted to kind of steer into this narrative even more, I'm sure that you could see an exponential arrow, right, on this graph here. What we don't immediately notice is that the y-axis starts at 40 million. This is a big pet peeve of mine, and I'll show you on the next graph that's a little bit more telling here. So our natural reaction is to assume that that y-axis starts at 0, right? Whether we're talking about electricity, if we're talking about greenhouse gases, and we're talking about a net zero goal, if we've got a graph of greenhouse gas emissions, we're thinking that that y-axis there, when we reach that, that's 0. That's done. That's nothing. So when we talk about that, we want to make sure that we are always zeroing that y-axis. This is a little bit more context here. So if you're familiar with the SB 241 reporting, if you're a public entity, you'll probably recognize kind of this context here. So here we've got all of the data labels on there. You know the true value of each one of those bars. And then we've got our 5% reduction goal. And so that in the 2-second sort of visual that you get from this graph, you can see in 2020 we met that goal. In 2021 and in 2022 we didn't. And that's something that, of course, we want to do. We want to meet that goal. And so that's kind of your initial takeaway. But here, with the 0 being on the y-axis, you can kind of get a sense of the true change and the true impact of those changes over time. And so that's always just kind of a best practice with honest storytelling. So again, kind of summarizing it with 3 different things here for keeping it honest. Know what your audience cares about. If you're talking about finance, talk about dollars and cents. If you're talking to a group that cares about climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, tell them what the relative carbon impact is. Knowing your audience and telling that story and telling that context is incredibly important. Zeroing your y-axis, making sure that those changes are not overly inflated. The only context for that, if you are going to do that, say maybe that's your y-axis, there is your break-even point or something like that. As long as you're calling it out and saying, hey, I have done this to the y-axis, that's okay. But best practice really is to keep that at 0. And then provide relative context, just like that example with the statements. So we want to have multiple points of context, whether that's the previous year, whether that's the budget as a whole. If you're saying, this is 60%, what is 60% in terms of actual numbers? What are we talking about there? So the context to things is incredibly important. So now we're going to take this sort of one step further. As we mentioned at the start, we're going to go through a little bit of what dashboards can do. And really, in terms of storytelling, I like to think of dashboards as the choose your own adventure. part of data and visualization. So what does that mean? So I'm sure that every one of you has found yourself in the situation where you've got a last minute report to do. You've worked for a couple hours. You've put a full complete story together, start to finish. So you submit that report, and then you get a couple questions back. And it's like, well, what if we looked at this from a 5-year period instead of a 10-year period? What if we included all of the city buildings in there? Or what if we just honed in and looked at public facing buildings like libraries and rec centers and things like that? So folks have a lot of follow-up questions. Your report probably got just enough context to get folks to ask 10 more important questions. And so when we let the audience be the author, what we're essentially doing with our dashboards is we're creating a safe space for folks to go and explore the data on their own when otherwise maybe they wouldn't be able to. It brings that accessibility of data exploration to more people. And essentially all we're doing as the folks that are creating those is we're setting up the guide rails for folks to go and explore. So what the things that they can choose while they're there, they can choose things like timescale. Like I said, that 5-year period versus a 10-year period. They can look at location. They can look at topic. What are they interested in? If it's your Parks and Rec department, maybe they care about that irrigation piece and they want to look at irrigation and water. They can add some level of data normalization. So if you're looking at energy consumption, maybe you don't want to look at that raw data. You don't want to look at electricity usage as a total over time. It's possible to look at things like energy use intensity. How do we look at that as energy usage as a comparison to square footage, and our square footage increases over time? How are we doing from that efficiency perspective? And then you can also sort your information, which is really important. So like I said, maybe you only want to look at a certain type of building, public facing versus just sort of city operations. And all of that can be done, and folks can go and explore the data on their own in this dashboard setting. So before we dive into kind of this component, it's definitely worth mentioning the concept of tidy data. So before you get started with your dashboard creation, I would watch a YouTube video or two on this. But essentially, the main concept of tidy data is limiting your variables. So if you're used to kind of the Excel spreadsheet, the thing that I always like to keep in mind is, can I filter this information? And you want to make sure that your variables are limited to just the necessary columns. So you're going to keep those variables limited. You're going to keep your columns limited. And then the last thing is consistency. So if you've spent all of this time kind of creating your dashboard, you want to make sure that it's something that's usable for the long term. And that starts with planning ahead of time. So you want to make sure that you're collecting all of the pieces of information that you're going to need when you start changing up that data download or that data upload. Things can get kind of messy pretty quickly. And so consistency is incredibly important for having a successful dashboard space. So let me give a quick example of tidy data. So what we're going to talk about first is what is not tidy data. So a little bit of context here. So this was a spreadsheet that I inherited for keeping track of our rebates that we offer for energy efficiency here at the city of Denton. And keep in mind what I talked about one variable in one column. So what we see here is not that, right? So when we think about the variable of time, down at the bottom, you can see not just a different column for each of these months, but a completely different sheet. This makes it very, very, very difficult to summarize information. So if I quickly wanted an answer of, what was the total rebate spent in October, November, and December, I'm not going to be able to quickly filter that information here because it's completely separated. Another good example, so on the right-hand side, you can see the columns of HVAC rebates. Now, what you can't see is next to that, essentially, we have each and every rebate category. So we've got solar screens in a column. We've got insulation in a column. We've got smart thermostats in a column. And what's challenging about that is you're not able to filter that information. When we talk about improving that and making that tidy, if we had a single variable, which is time, we want that all in one column, and maybe that's application date. So now we can filter by months, we can filter by years, and we can get a sense of when all of those applications took place. Another column that we can have is rebate type, right? That's just one variable and we want that in one column. So then we could filter by, okay, show me all of the HVAC units, show me all of the smart thermostat units. And in Excel, we can quickly filter that. So that's really the mindset to have when it comes to tidy data and when it comes to dashboards. So let's go through a quick example. So I will exit out of the PowerPoint here for a second and make sure that we can all kind of see my screen here. All right, so I think we're still good here. So this program is called Microsoft Power BI. It probably comes free with your suite, and there's a lot that you can do with just the free version. So I want to go through a quick example and show you that it doesn't take a lot to kind of generate even just one graph and start playing around with this. So on the right-hand side, you have a suite of visual options here for your generation. And then over here, when you do your data upload, you can do this straight from Excel. Over here, you can say, I want to get my data from an Excel workbook, and you can import that with all of your column headers. And so essentially what we're doing, if you've ever worked with pivot tables at all, this is just very, very visual pivot tables. So let's take a look at the water example from earlier in the presentation. So I'll just tell Power BI here that I want a line chart, and I'll have it take up the whole page. And as you can see here, now we've got our options for x-axis, y-axis, and then maybe we want a legend in there as well. So we're going to make this really, really simple. So on the x-axis here, I want my date. And we're going to keep that just by year and by month. And then I'm going to go to my water data, and I'm going to pull my total. And I'm going to put that on the y-axis. Now, this is the original chart that we started with here, right? It's a kind of auto-generated that. But we want to be able to get more of that context. So we've got our little option here to drill down. And now we've got that in the monthly category there. So in about 60 seconds, we've got a nice usable chart here, and we can take a look at all of the formatting. We can add our axis titles here. We can change the title of the graph, all of that stuff. So kind of cooking show example here, right? We've put this in the oven, and now we've got a little bit more, a version that's a little bit more on its way. When I was talking about the tidy data concept, I talked a lot about filtering. And that's really important when we talk about these dashboards. So we want to create a safe space where folks can ask questions of the data by themselves and get a nice usable answer. So what do we have here? So we've got some filters at the top. So in the city of Denton, when we put together our state reporting for Senate Bill 241, we want to take a look at our buildings and facilities. We want to take a look at our streetlights and our traffic signals. We want to know what electricity is used on our water and our wastewater operations. So we've got all of those kind of broken down in one column in our data set. The other thing in this example that we're going to take a look at is time. So over here, we've got some call outs for total kilowatt hours that are used and then total cost. So right now, what that's calculating is everything from 2016 out to present here in 2023. So let's say that we have somebody who's curious about water. So they'll go in and they'll say, okay, maybe I want to look at water and wastewater both here. So I'm going to select both of those. And then maybe I only care about 2019, 2020, and 2021. So I'm going to highlight those. So now I've got the total kWh there, and I've got the total cost for that entire time frame. But now maybe I want to just look at, okay, I'm going to take a look at just water. So we're going to look at that. And what we see here is we see a good bit of variability there. Again, in the summer months from our water production side, our water production is working harder in the summer months. But maybe if we take a look at wastewater, here, not so much, right? Wastewater, because all of that water production in the summer months is going to outdoor water usage, our wastewater is staying pretty consistent in terms of their electricity usage because they're running at a more consistent threshold when it comes to that water that's coming into the plant. And so just from sort of a simple dashboard there, we can gather some different information about our city and answer some questions. Now, this can be as simple. This was about a 5-10 minute creation, and we could send something like this out there. You can also take this as far as what I'm about to show you here, and even this is not sort of the end. There's so many different things that you could do with a platform like this. So when it comes to our Senate Bill 241 reporting for the state, we want to report all of our electricity usage, our natural gas usage, our water usage. We want to keep track of our building square footage as well, so we have a sense of efficiency. And when I did this report for the first time, I kind of swore, we did a lot of, we did a meter inventory, we did a lot of different things. And in my mind, I was like, I am never going to do this way again. And so the system that we essentially have set up now is we've got all of our data coming in from our monthly bills, and we've got that set up to kind of auto import here. And then when we go to do our Senate Bill 241 report, we've got all of the values that we need here kind of called out for that report. And then you can select your reporting year just from one of those basic filters that we talked about. So if I want to take a look at 2021, we'll see that it's slightly different, but we've got all of our totals for KWH. We have our different electricity providers, and then we've got our water as well. So that's one example. Another thing that I find very useful when we're talking about this, because a lot of times, right, you're not making dashboards for yourself. You're making these dashboards for other people to go and explore the data. And so the questions that I really like to ask of folks is, what do you need from this, right? What are you looking to gain? This next one that I'm going to show you is a collaboration with our Parks and Rec office here. So they were looking at all of their sort of irrigation meters across the city. And so we thought that that was a good time to put together sort of a search tool. So if you've got your water account number, you're like, I'm not really sure what all goes into this water account. So we've got it over here where the only thing really you can search by is your account number. So you can go and you can either type that in or you can search for it here in the dropdown. And then essentially what we get is all of this information. So this is one of our libraries. They have 2 meters at that library over this 10 to 12 year period here. And then we've got the total water usage, and we can see that this is indoor only at this particular account. When we were working with Parks and Rec, they had a lot of GIS information. And so we wanted to kind of help mimic that, help them in their search. And so they could go and take a look at some of the different things that they had going on from a GIS perspective and say that they hopped in on one here. So this is one of the dog parks that we have in the city of Denton. And so what we see really quickly here is, okay, we've done a quick visual search, right, for this one on a map. We said, what is this? So we know that this is the dog park. We've got the address, and we see that there's a couple different meters here, right? So we've got 3 irrigation meters that are all at this account. And so we can take a look at that. We can take a look at it over time. So if we only care about the last 3 years, again, we can kind of take a look at some of those patterns there for Wiggly Field. And so really, this was a lot of asking questions, a lot of saying, how can we help you with some of your information? And like I said, really, this is incredibly customizable. And what you're doing is essentially creating a space for different people to go and ask their own questions. And you're keeping it in a way that, again, has those guide rails. They can search and get reliable information back to them in a really timely fashion. So we'll jump back to our presentation here just to kind of wrap everything up. So bringing it all together, what's the take-home message, right? So we want to make sure that when we're telling a story with our data, we're giving the right amount of context. So we have to know our audience, and we have to know what relationship to different things they care about. Do they care about the whole number? Do they care about how things have changed over time? Do they care about the relationship to the whole? All of these are really important, and whether it's a report or a presentation, we want to make sure that the context is there. We want to make sure that we're keeping it simple. We want one message to come across in each one of our visuals, and we want the audience to be able to take away that message in about 2 seconds at a first glance. We don't want multiple different things in one graphic, right? We don't want to say, okay, this is essentially a word search or find the 4 different meanings that are in this graph, right? We want one, and we want it to be easily digestible. While we're doing that, we don't want to over exaggerate any of the information that we provide. We want to keep it honest. How we do that, we want to make sure that we're keeping that context honest. We're keeping the y-axis at 0. And we're doing all of those things to make sure that the story that we're telling is one that is honest, and folks get the best information to make those decisions. We wrapped up with a little bit about dashboards. Again, this is a framework for folks to go and ask questions that they have of the data. And it's up to us to kind of provide a nice space for them where they can do that, and they can tell their own stories. So if they're a building manager, right, they only want to know about that building. So it's a space for them to go and kind of look and figure all of that information out. So what are our conclusions? So anybody can really be a numbers person, right? We are all making some form of charts or graphs in our job day to day. And so it takes a little bit of creativity, a lot of accessibility, right? We are the gatekeepers of this information. So we want to make sure that we're putting it out there in a way that is honest and meaningful for folks to make good decisions. So that is my presentation. Again, my name is James Douglas. I really appreciate everybody taking the time today. If you want to learn more about how all of this is incorporated into some of our programs, you can visit sustainabledenton.com. You can see things like our annual greenhouse gas inventory, where we've got a lot of data visuals in there. And so again, thank you for your time, and I would be happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, JT. It's a great presentation. So let's see if we have any questions coming in. Not right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my, we have one that just came in. Can you talk more about the process for automating data entry into the Power BI dashboard? And then did you work directly with each of your utility providers or use separate data automation tools?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when it comes to, I'll do the first one first. So when it comes to that automation, you've got a couple different options. So if your utility provider has the ability to kind of do a direct upload into Power BI, that is always the easiest. And it's great because you can kind of keep that live information. If you don't have that ability, that's okay. There's also kind of the workaround way of doing that. So no matter what utility you're working with, they probably have sort of a standard output. And a lot of times Excel works as sort of that intermediary between the two programs and how they can talk to each other. So as long as they have that standard output, what you can essentially do instead of, I know I did this for a long time, so I took that output every quarter, every month, whatever it might be, and you spend a lot of time cleaning that data and making it usable. A great feature that Power BI has is you can essentially, when you clean that data, you can log all of your changes. And what it'll do is you can tell Power BI, hey, next time I give you this data set, and just all you end up having to do is save your file under exactly the same name. Power BI remembers exactly what you did to clean that data set, and it'll do it again. And so now you can take that raw export, if it's an Excel export, and you can just say, I'm going to save this file as the same name in the same place. And Power BI will do that. If you're looking to kind of grab a YouTube video on that, it's called Power Query in Power BI. And so that's a really great tool if you've got that sort of raw Excel export from each of your different utilities.
That's great. We'll also put some hyperlinks in our response email with some of those resources. So a link to that Power Query video that you just mentioned, JT, so that people can use that resource as well. Well, while we're waiting for more questions, I'll go ahead and do some wrap up. And so then I have a couple of questions for you as well. So I have some information I do want to share, and then we can take some more questions as people type them in the chat. I just wanted to let you know about our upcoming CLC webinars. We have a couple that are coming up next month. University of Texas, the Longhorns success story in May. And also we have TEPRI, who will be showcasing their energy equity inspector, as well as a Capital Area Council of Governments. And they're going to talk about air quality and the nexus with energy efficiency. In June, we're going to be having CURB come in and talk about the case studies that they've done on really like what you could do in residential spaces for energy efficiency, and also including renters in that space, which I'm pretty excited about. July, we'll be showcasing our upcoming cohort, benchmarking and greenhouse gas inventory cohort that we're partnering with ICLEI. And then in August, we'll be presenting our landscape analysis of local government needs, which is a survey that we'll be sending out this coming May, and we'd love your participation as a local government, university, county, or school district on really looking at what we need. And that's more in depth. I'll talk about in my next slide, is just making a difference. Again, who's eligible: cities, counties, higher education, council of governments, and community-based nonprofits. And this information is going to be provided in a report to the State Energy Conservation Office for creation of their upcoming programs for the following year.
Hey, Sean, you hit swap displays at the top.
Thanks, JT. I appreciate that. Thanks. Is that better?
Yes, that looks good.
Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to stop my sharing and share a screen with a Slido. I did not realize it was showing you guys my screen, which, you know, with technology, always being graceful with that. So let's see about if we've gotten any other questions. Do you see anything in the chat, JT?
Not right now, but I will say just on some of the dashboard information, I know that it can be pretty intimidating starting out, especially if you're like, I've never, worked with anything like this before. And that was definitely the boat that I was in when I started. And really, there is a very large community of folks out there that are learning this step by step. And so I definitely wouldn't have been able to learn half of what I know without some folks in my organization, outside my organization. When we hit a problem, we kind of reach out and say, hey, have you ever, experienced this or anything like that, even just getting started. And so my contact information is on there. So if it's something that you're really interested in, you want to add this skill set for your organization, just for you personally, feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to either help where I can, put you in touch with some folks that also, really like this stuff. But yeah, never be afraid to ask when it comes to some of this stuff.
We do have some questions that are on Slido, so I'll go ahead and present those to you, and we can go from there. JT, do you see the question?
Yes.
Okay. So, with one question is also to the audience, but I would love to hear your perspective as well, is what challenges do you have in sharing the data? So JT, what about you? What kind of challenges have you had in sharing data? Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks. I think for me, it's really about gathering information about the audience. Sometimes that's not always readily available, but it really changes, right? The information that you want to provide. And then, yeah, I'll kind of agree a little bit there with the legal aspect of that. So, there is some challenge in how do we aggregate data, right? To tell a cohesive story while kind of, protecting any of that more specific information, right, that might be out there. And so that's definitely one that comes with a lot of practice too. And so definitely agree with that. And then, yeah, finding a good platform for sure. When it comes to kind of Excel, you're telling one story at a time, you're building those graphs one at a time. And then the learning curve with something like Power BI is definitely there, right? And it takes some time and investment. So definitely understand that one too.
And I wanted to circle back with legal. I mean, even you presenting this data to us, you had to go through a process to share this in the webinar, right?
Right. Yeah. So if you're a local government, it's always safe to stick with information that's already public information, right? So all of these that I presented today are either items that we've presented to one of our committees, one of our council committees, or it's stuff that we've already provided to the state of Texas through our required state reporting. And so, yeah, staying in those areas is always helpful. And then, things like when we talk about for example, sector-based use, if you're talking about residential versus commercial versus industrial electricity use in your city, always kind of keeping that aggregated is best practice. So, yeah.
And then here, one of the challenges someone listed was platforms, and that's very true to the case. Like you said, Power BI, it's usually free, but there's also other platforms, and that was one question I did want to display. And for those of you who are here, and if you go to Slido, I'm really curious, or you can just put it in the chat as well, is what platform do you use for visualizing data right now? In the past, when I worked for Travis County, it was actually what we had, right? I would use Excel quite a bit. But, there was a movement before I left the county agency to use Power BI. But there's also, where there's funding mechanisms. So a lot of places are using Tableau as well. So I'm really curious about what platforms you use to visualize your data. And then, JT had mentioned that sometimes you can use a PowerPoint as a good platform as well to visualize your information. With you, JT, like with your data, like you said, you had to put a lot of this together. It's already public, with a Senate bill. That I'm just curious, what made your desire to turn back around and then present that data to the city council? Was there a push from the upper management, or you're just like, well, we need them to understand and know what we're reporting to the state?
Yeah, I think it's nice that we kind of have in the city of Denton, we kind of have a framework that's built around sustainability where we're going to have these conversations about energy conservation and water conservation. And I think, we make it a point to kind of present those results to either management or elected officials who have a stake or an interest in that information. And then really we have some positive conversations that come out of it. So when folks are, talking about I always get excited when folks start talking about things like our water conservation as a means to save electricity. You know what I mean? And that's something that kind of jumps out from the information when you start talking about it like that. And so, having those conversations is really the goal of all of that. But yeah, our sustainability framework kind of allows us and gives us space to do that. So.
Yeah, no, I think it's fantastic. It's always great to share the information that because then people do get excited, and especially with conservation and the nexus with energy and water, people don't always make that connection. Well, so also it would be great to kind of show some other questions that came in. So have you found utilizing a data dashboard provides a better understanding of information for decision makers?
So I'll say not so much for decision makers and sort of having that being an outside facing item. I think really internally, what our goal is with that is an item of accessibility. So even if you're just an employee, say, and you're working in, one of our, 40 or so office buildings that we have in the city of Denton, you may be curious, what the impact is of your specific building. And so that's not something that the regular employee has access to, or the regular manager may have access to. As the conservation coordinator, I get a lot of questions around, hey, my energy bill that I got for my building, which first of all is amazing that folks are looking at their energy bills for their buildings. A lot of times, that can just go through the process, get paid, and maybe the few folks who are keeping an eye out for it see that. But when building managers kind of start asking questions about their buildings and they have a place where they can go and readily access that information, they can see the timeline of here's how it's been for the last 10 years, and they can see that context. So really internally, it's a motivation of accessibility is really what we're going for.
Have you found that building managers are now asking you, hey, will you come and perform an audit for me so I can find some low-hanging fruits for energy?
Yeah, I mean, not exactly my area of expertise, but definitely it's something that, especially when we talk about like from a priority standpoint, right? We can see building function, just like if you work with Energy Star Portfolio Manager, you can see what is that building's use, and then how does it compare to other buildings of that use. We can do all of that same kind of stuff and have that really kind of accessible internally to everybody. And so when we're talking about comparing fire stations and we're comparing libraries to each other, right, it helps us prioritize some of the actions there for that, for sure.
That's great. Well, let's see if there's been any more questions coming in. Well, I guess we'll just go ahead and close out, and let me make sure that I show the right screen, JT, so be sure to let me know about that. And do you have anything you want to add? I really appreciate your time, JT, and sharing your expertise. And do you mind if we share your contact information and our follow-up email?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. And then to follow up again, you'll receive all the slides. And then those of you who attended who also need let's swap the displays. Do you have the correct display being shown?
Hit it one more time. There you go. That's good.
Interesting. And we also have continuing education units. So please follow up and answer the survey. And so that way we can send you the continuing education unit that you may need. And thanks again for your time. And thanks again, JT. You have a great day.